Holy shit, I didn't think it could be done, but BioWare did it. The best analogy I can give you is that the original game was a piece of raw steel, and the remaster was treated like the folding process that Japanese sword makers would use to remove impurities from their imperfect steel. It wasn't perfect to start, and it wasn't perfect at the end, but it was a safe set of improvements that left it feeling whole. It remains distinctly its own game, but just plays so much better than before. To make it easy, let's go back and address everything we talked about in the before video, starting with gameplay. It's not perfect by any means, but it's a definite improvement, with some weapons finally feeling satisfying to use, if a little unbalanced. Things like the assault rifles having a combination of single fire, burst fire, and fully automatic weapons really encourage you to try out each one you pick up. Same with fire rates on sniper rifles being different. There's this feeling of actually hitting your enemy that was largely lost in the original game. Still being limited to an RNG circle rather than learning to master recoil is always going to be a bit of a downside for me, but one I can overlook is at least I feel like I'm shooting a gun rather than rolling dice. I felt a need to utilize my powers a bit more in this hardcore playthrough, but generally more for a quick boost to my health or shields rather than a way to actively influence the battlefield, which is what I was looking for. It also always felt like my teammates had powers that were unavailable for my use, even though I rarely saw them use these powers actively on the battlefield. But I could have turned off auto power use, so that's on me. The biggest letdown for me, however, was just the amount of deaths that felt like bullshit. Often when I was in my groove advancing on the enemy, I'd be put down by a single shot seemingly out of nowhere that once again felt like failing a stat check rather than being outskilled. The early game especially gave me little incentive to return for a playthrough on Insanity, but we'll see how it feels on an imported character. The Mako was a welcome surprise for me, feeling just as loose and fun as the original while feeling improved in almost every aspect. If it had forward thrusters in the original games, I must have missed it because it was a new addition for me here and I really enjoyed them. It's still pretty terrible control-wise with the WASD keys seemingly remapping themselves as your camera changes, leaving you unable to move in some situations, but it doesn't happen if you stop trying to be creative with your movement and just drive around in straight lines like you really should in the Mako anyway. I really enjoyed my time in the Mako, feeling like a better experience overall, but some things never change. Exploration, on the other hand, has not improved much. I still only felt the need to finish missions that would come back up in later story beats down the line, avoiding anything else. Even with gameplay and Mako improvements, I just never felt encouraged to take time out of my day to go and cross objectives off my journal list. One of the biggest reasons for this is the inability to go back and finish these missions after the completion of the game, forcing me to put the story I actually want to take part in on hold to go through boring, inconsequential fetch quests is never going to be enough for me. Thankfully, this was rectified in later titles, but it does feel like a missed opportunity given this is a remaster. So onto the main story mission, starting with Eden Prime. There was no real changes here, so I have no real compliments or complaints, except that it feels like one of the most well-balanced places in the game, which makes sense. It's one of the only places where developers can know going into it what equipment you'll be bringing to the party and with what team. Moving on to Theram, you'll find no instant death lava, so the gameplay additions make it just as good as you remember in most places, with the only problem being the fight with an armature before you head into the dig site. With a low-level squad, the combination of riflemen pushing you aggressively, stalkers flinging around at nearly impossible speeds delivering devastating shots, a sniper that you can probably barely see without your own sniper rifle, and an armature sending one-shot kills at you while you hide behind extremely minimal cover, watching your level 5 to 10 crew die almost immediately just isn't fun. It was the only point in the game I seriously considered lowering the difficulty to veteran or normal, and I would really like this issue fixed. The mission on Pharos is also largely unchanged, with the only thing to say being that having melee on a separate keybind really removed a lot of undue stress that was created in the last section of the colony, and I really appreciated that change, small as it may seem. They claim that there was improvements to the boss fight at the end of Novaria, but to me it played out essentially the same. Ring around the rosy with Geth and Commandos before dumping half a mag into Benezia, which didn't really need to be its own gameplay section. It honestly felt like a cutscene, so it should have been. It's not any worse, it's just not an improvement, which is fine, but it's weird that when I heard about the gameplay improvements, Novaria was often brought up by developers as being one of their best improvements when they're changing the layout and they're changing the balancing and all this, and it just didn't feel any different. It's unfortunate. Virmire was pretty much left alone, but the resolution updates letting the vibrant planet really shine in all its glory, paired with an easier to drive Mako, somehow elevates what was already the best mission in the game to something even better. Ilios is still a big green blob of a maze that I fucking hate. That's not what I wrote in my script, but it's the truth. I fucking despise it. It was somehow worse than I remember being from gameplay, although that could be more to do with the difficulty setting rather than the actual remaster. The second half of the mission, though, from the run to the conduit all the way to the end game on the Citadel, remains one of my favorite experiences in the game, with the end cinematics really feeling like they've been done justice. The boss fight with Saren could be called an improvement in some regards, parts, but it's worse in other ways, so that's a wash from where I'm standing. They're both bad, they're just bad in slightly different ways. The inventory system was still a bit of a chore overall, but upping the number of items allowed from 150 to 300 really cut down on how much time I spent clearing out junk, and the ability to mark items and convert them all in one go was certainly a welcome change. I'm actually pretty happy to give the inventory system my seal of approval. They made some really minor changes that relieved some major headaches, and I have no problem calling that smart game development. Although I would trade it for the Mass Effect 3 inventory system in a heartbeat. Yet again, they hit the nail on the head when it comes to the visuals, making the game look just as good today as it felt when you bought it in 2007. The game just overall looks fantastic, paired with it being easy to run at a nice high frame rate. I stayed steady around 160 to 180 FPS at 1440p the whole time, only experiencing one weird issue where I dropped to about 20 FPS after killing Dr. Salion. The only thing I'd like to add here is that it would have been really nice to have actual graphics options in the options menu. Maybe I missed them, but they weren't there for me, to be able to fine-tune your adjustment if you're on a lower end system. The entire experience for me was one I found to be extremely positive. There's areas for improvement, but I'd easily choose to revisit the remaster over the original, and I think that's all that matters in the end. There's nothing I can really point to and say, this is what made it so much better, which is a good thing. The frame rate may be Inception because it was a huge boost for me, but it just feels like everything they touched was an overall improvement. The majority of what they left alone was better left alone. It's easy to go back and try to leave your mark on something by adding some wild new thing or some exciting new concept or something from a later game that really just wouldn't fit in one of the earlier titles. But they followed the rule of engineering. You know something is perfect not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. I'll be taking a slower approach to Mass Effect 2 this week, so join me for streams daily until it's done. I'll be finishing pretty much everything available, Firewalker may be an exception, and it'll be an Insanity playthrough. Follow me on Twitter for announcements, my Twitch for stream notifications, and drop me a sub here on YouTube, maybe even a like. I really appreciate it, guys. Links for socials down below. Thanks for staying with me till the end. I'm Purple, and that'll be it for me on this one. Have a good night, and always remember to smile.